I've been doing this for 15 years, but ever since I was even younger than you, this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a journalist. And in fact, every single job that I have had in my life, going back to my very first one of delivering newspapers when I was all of 10 years old, has had something to do with the media. But every other job that I've ever had has had to do with the media. And so that's always been my passion, it's always been my love, and I think I have the most unique job in the entire world because I never, ever, ever watch the clock. Every day is different. I meet new people all the time. I write brand new stories every single day, and I'm always trying to beat that thing. And what I mean by beat that thing is to try to make sure that I make my deadline every single day. And so I'm always looking for more time. I'm never saying, oh my gosh, when's it gonna be? Oh, 5 o'clock and I can go home or whatever it is. So that's a critical element of the job that is far different than many, many other industries that should be something, if you're interested in it, be prepared for because it's very interesting. So question, let's go.
I know that when you're kind of in that general journalist thing, you get a lot of, like, not necessarily hate, but people are always second guessing you because they always think, oh, they're being really biased on their stories,
Sure.
or they're not showing every part of the story.
Sure.
How do you deal with, like, people, like, saying that you're making things up?
Sure, you have to have a thick skin. You really do. And you learn very quickly that you have to take the good criticism with the bad criticism. And I think it's similar in some ways to being a public servant, like anybody in education, law enforcement, any of those kinds of jobs where you are out in the public and people see you all the time. And you just have to be ready that they feel like you're a part of their family. We're in people's living rooms every single night, every single morning. And so you kind of feel like I might be somebody's brother or uncle or dad in a way that they look at me because I'm always sitting right there next to them. And what do we do with our family members sometimes? We can be critical, can't we, a little bit? You know, and so that's kind of how I look at it. In fact, I got an email this morning from a viewer who was critical of where I put my hands during a newscast. And so you have to be prepared for things like that and just understand that's okay because that is part of a viewer finding a connection with you, and that's what we want. We want people to trust us, we want people to like us and enjoy watching us. And so you just have to understand that that's part of it, that you're going to get some of that criticism. It's certainly okay. Yeah. Other questions?
What is actually the funniest story that you've ever written?
Funniest story. Let me think about that because that's a question I don't think that I've gotten too often over the years. Well, now this will predate you, but not necessarily the two fine young women in the back. But one of the very first interviews I ever had was with Captain Kangaroo.
Oh my goodness.
See, now Captain. Okay. When you kids were younger, Barney. You know, Barney
Yeah.
is?
Yeah.
Okay, in a way, this was the Barney of our generation.
Yeah.
You get put in jail?
No, but when I was growing up, there were a couple of different shows that I watched as a child that were like kids programs. Sesame Street, Romper Room, which was based out of our area right here. Electric Company and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And Captain Kangaroo. And so this was in a way a little bit of a mini idol of mine. And so I had the chance to interview him. And think about interviewing Barney. Okay, isn't that kind of goofy? What questions would you ask?
What's your favorite color?
Now that was one of those cases where the way news works many times, and you will learn this, is that it's not always something you can prepare for. Things will happen, interviews will come up, where you have to be ready to go at a moment's notice and come up with questions on the fly. Now there are other stories that you can do a great deal of research on. But Captain Kangaroo, I just had to rely a little bit on life experience because I had this interview plopped in my lap. Similar to a number of years ago when there was a senator from Illinois who was running for president, and I think you probably have heard of him, his name is Barack Obama.
I think I've heard of it.
I don't know.
president.
The phone rang in my office, and I picked it up, and on the other end, a person said, hello, I'm calling from Senator Obama's campaign. Would you like to interview him? And I said, absolutely. And he said, can you be ready in 5 minutes?
Oh.
And so I had an interview with who would then become the President of the United States in 5 minutes. And the interview lasted longer than 5 minutes, and so I had to immediately come up with a series of questions and be prepared for that. So that was a funny interview in a different way because it was unusual, it was quirky, and I had to be prepared, but in both cases, you never know what's going to happen with news. Yep, go ahead.
Like, how is it, like, you've been in the business for 15 years, have you seen evolution of, like, world affairs, like the growth of China, 9/11, things going over in the Middle East, stuff like that? How have you seen kind of the evolution of?
Well, unfortunately, the world has become more violent, and we cover it differently than I think we even did 15 years ago. Our taste for news is far more immediate than it was when I was your age. When I was your age, we had 2 newscasts every day that we relied upon. So I would watch the Channel 7 news at 6, and if I was allowed to stay up by my parents at 10 o'clock. There were no of these. There was no internet. I mean, we basically got our news through the newspaper in the morning, maybe the radio once or twice during the day, and then the television newscasts later on that night. And so we basically had to rely on a very limited amount of viewership time to get our news. Today it's far different. Information comes like this. You expect it much faster. You expect it to come from all different kinds of sources. And so because of that, we have to roll with the punches and report news maybe just a little bit differently, not necessarily changing our ethics or our morals or our values or anything like that and how we report, but we have to be faster and smarter about how we report news because it comes faster. And the way the world has changed has forced us to be that way even more so, because it seems like world events are, I would say we're captivated more by world events today than we were when I was a kid. I feel that way. Some good, some bad.
So when you don't need to come up with things in like
It's not easy.
5 seconds. How do you prepare every day for the
Well, I would say
news?
being a journalist is you have to know a little bit about a lot. You have to dabble in everything from politics to pop culture to your local schools to sports to weather. You just have to know a little bit about a lot, and that helps you be prepared. It helps at least get the ball rolling with a line of questions. If an interview, if breaking news happens, or you have an interview plopped in your lap, okay, I know just enough to be able to get the line of questions going. And then what I try to teach future or current journalists that I work with that might be a little less experienced than me, if I'm giving them advice, is I try to make the interview, after you get the ball rolling and you kind of have a template for the questions you want to ask, make the rest of that interview a little bit like a tennis match. And what I mean by that is you're feeding off the answers. Your questions are coming off of their answers. And so you're really listening and having a conversation, but you're throwing the ball back in their court every time that they serve it back to you. Does that make sense? And so they might say something, you might say something to me that I'd never thought of as a response to one of my questions, and I have to be ready to question that. Can you elaborate? What did you mean by that? I don't understand. 3 of the most important words that journalists should have are, I don't know. And what I mean by that is we need to be curious by nature, and we don't have to have all of the answers. We're the ones that go seek the answers. We question the people who have them and then put them on the spot and question their authority about that answer. But if we open our minds and walk into a certain subject, a certain topic or subject and say, to be honest, I don't know that much about it, but I'm willing to learn and I want to find out and investigate and ask questions. Then you can make your viewers that much more informed and intelligent because of what you're finding out. I walked into something and said, like, I know everything about this. I know everything there is to know about Pete Junior High. What am I going to learn? Do you think I'm really going to be able to tell a good story? Because all of the information is just coming from up here, from what I know. Well, that's a very, if you saw my brain, you would know. Very, very limited amount up there. And so I need to find out. I need to find information and learn and be able to disseminate. So that's a big thing that journalists have to do. We have to ask questions. I don't know.
Would you ever consider, like, if you, like, on the off chance that you were ever offered a position, like, as a national news anchor, would you take that, or would you rather stay more local? Like, if,
Would you like to be my agent?
like, if someone on the Today Show ended up retiring and you, or quitting or something, and they asked you to be the news anchor for them, would you take that opportunity, or would you stay local here?
I am a small town guy, and I'll answer that in two ways. Number one, nobody's been knocking on my door to say so I'm not going to sit here and say I've had that opportunity. It'd be very flattering. But I'm a small town guy. I grew up in eastern Iowa and went to school at UNI, and my wife's family is from here, and I have a lot of family members here. And so this is where we want to be, and so I can't imagine being anywhere else. But thank you, that's a good question.
How do you report news that you know will, like, upset people and that you, like, say, for example, the Paris attacks, stock market crashes, like, how do you report that when you know you're going to get criticism and hate for reporting on the subject?
You have to, in my mind, you have to report it not stone-faced. That's not necessarily where I'm going with this, but you have to remove emotion from it. As a journalist, when you know it's a controversial subject. Now, it's different with necessarily the Paris attacks if you're talking about something that most people would agree is an awful, awful thing. As a journalist, I think it's okay to show emotion in that because we're human beings, we're real people. But if you're talking about something that might be more controversial, that necessarily isn't black and white, everybody agrees with it kind of a thing, we try to take emotion out of it and just say, okay, here's what we know, here's who we've spoken to, this is what they say, here are the facts, and for lack of a better phrase, you can decide how you feel about it after seeing this story. I think that is a tried and true measure of journalism that I don't think has changed, even though a lot has changed about the world over the years. That you just try to remove emotion from a story that you know is going. And now that doesn't necessarily mean you don't capture emotion and put emotion in the story, but the emotion shouldn't come from me necessarily. You know what I mean? Okay.
How would you report something, like, if something was personalized, would they take you off of the job? If, like, if something happened to one of your family members or something happened to one of your friends, would they take you off the job?
I might have to remove myself from the reporting of that story. That's a very good question, because that has happened to people over the years where something has affected them personally, whether it was their family or something else. And yeah, you would have to, not necessarily every single time, but in a lot of cases, yes.
Because I don't know, because you said that when you're reporting things, you want to remove emotion, but you also kind of want to put hints of emotion in some things.
If the story elicits or has emotion as a part of it, you want to be able to tell that story. But that doesn't necessarily mean, as a reporter, I sit there and say, oh my gosh, this story just touched me, and it touched my heart, and you know what I mean? That's me imparting my own emotion into the story. And so there are two different things here. Paris attacks to be different. 9/11 was a different story. I was on the air on 9/11. Now, I was on the air at a local station. I wasn't on the air at a national station, but I remember that day. And all of you would be too young, obviously, to remember it, but
Not be alive.
you would not be alive.
I missed it.
I think I'd be in my parents'
Yeah.
stomach, but
I was
1 month old.
I
wouldn't
was,
say
that.
I was
I
2 months old.
I tell absolutely every group that I speak to when this comes up or I bring it up, that 9/11 was the most important day in the history of broadcast television. And the reason I say that is because we were telling people, network news mostly, if our country was safe or not. If there was broadcast television when Pearl Harbor happened, it would have been a similar situation. There was broadcast television when President Kennedy was shot, and that was an incredibly emotional, powerful day. But 9/11 to me stretched even further because we were talking about an entire nation that at that time, and you remember, we did not know whether we were being attacked from multiple angles. And so that was such a critical day, and everybody was tuned into what broadcast news was doing that day, and you had to get it right. And in some cases, we didn't get it right, but by and large, we did. I mean, I think network news was on the air for something like 36 straight hours. I mean, it was an incredible marathon, and that was a day where anchors let their emotions, news reporters let their emotions show, and there was nothing wrong with it. The one that I respected the most was Peter Jennings, who has since died, and he was a reporter for ABC News. And he was out of New York, and his children were in New York at that time, and he did not know where they were. And so there was a period of time on the air where he was trying to find his own kids, and he let the viewers know that. And when he did that, as a viewer, that connected me more to him because I was a parent. And so I'm thinking more as a parent than necessarily a journalist, and I connected myself to him watching it that day. I'm like, okay, I get how you feel. And sometimes as a journalist or an anchor, you want to do that. I don't think he intentionally wanted to do that day. It just happened. But you want to make sure that people know that we're human beings as well.
So it's kind of similar to the fact of like Sandy Hook, what happened with that.
Sure.
And that would be a good case to let your emotions show.
Yeah.
Because of what horrible things happened there. So would that be an okay situation to show your
Yes. You might have to temper it. You don't necessarily want to go over the top because you still have a story to tell. But yes, that is a story where you can be a real human being and tell that story, and I think the viewers would accept it.
Would you be able to show your emotion on, say, like financial crises, like the stock market crash of 2008? Why do you guys laugh?
No, that's a really good question. That's a really good question because most likely something like that is going to happen again in our lifetime, okay? And one thing that I was taught, not only during 9/11, but during other major incidents that I've reported on, is that part of our job is to, yes, let your emotion, if it dictates it, show. But also part of our job, and this is where media and journalism kind of becomes a balancing act, part of it is to try to, if you have information that would give this impression, please do so. Let people know it's going to be okay, that the world isn't coming to an end. Okay, and to give somewhat of a measured response that, okay, yes, the Dow is falling, it's down, 1,500 points in a matter of 30 minutes, but I have just spoken to so-and-so and they've told me this, and we believe that the market might correct itself. You know what I mean? That one thing that we have to do is to not instill panic if we can avoid it. And I try to impart that as a journalist that, look, at the end of the day, things are going to be okay by and large. We're going to have stories tonight that you may not like. They may be troubling. We may have stories that you will really like. But at the end of the day, hopefully once you're done watching our newscast, you feel like that was a pretty fair representation of what Cedar Falls is, what Waterloo is, what Dubuque is, and I know that the world's going to be okay. I don't want people walking away from a newscast thinking, oh my gosh, the world really is crappy. Yep, go ahead.
Oh.
Sorry.
So like when you make a mistake.
A lot.
I know. No. Because when us 7 film and we make a mistake, everyone starts to burst out laughing, and we just
All the time.
stop it because.
And sometimes
But you guys, like,
you can't.
If it's live television, yeah.
So then what?
Well, after you've done it for a while, you learn a little bit about when it's okay to let your guard down and enjoy the mistake and celebrate it in a way. Because depending on the story, if it's a lighthearted story, if it's not the world, like a 9/11 story, something like that, and you make a mistake, it's okay to make light of yourself. If it's a big deal that you need to correct on air, if it's a right or wrong thing, black or white, fact or fiction, you got to correct it. And I've had to do that before. Wait a minute, I said this is what I really mean. In fact, when I was a very young reporter and I was doing a story about a murder, and the verdict had come in, and the verdict was not guilty. And so when the anchor tossed it to me in the field, they said, Jerry Gallagher is live on the scene at the courthouse, tell us what the verdict was. And I go, not guilty. All the viewers heard was guilty, because the first word was cut off. They didn't have my mic turned on. So somebody got into my ear and said, oh, no, you said guilty, he's not guilty, even though I knew I said not guilty. And so once I was able to collect myself, I came back around and said, as I understand it, what you might have heard me say was guilty. He was not guilty, just to make sure everybody knows, what the facts were there. And so you do have to correct yourself. But there are certainly other times where you make a mistake that it's okay. I would advise you all, if you're taping, and you start to get into the routine of you kind of feel comfortable in front of the camera and you know what you're doing, and somebody makes a mistake and it's like a lighthearted moment, let the camera roll. It's okay. And you might even want to include that in your final product. Because somebody watching Tiger, what's it called, Tiger Feed, Tiger Feed, they'd be able to say, oh, you know what, I appreciate that because we're all human beings. So.
What skills do you find necessary to be a journalist, and what personality traits or characteristics help with the job?
All kinds of personality characteristics help, because I don't think there are any two journalists that are the same. However, I will say, and not all journalists agree with me on this, I think the two most important characteristics to have are a curious nature. Like, you just wonder, why? What? Who? When? Where? How? You just never, you might look outside and just wonder, why is that tree not green? Do you question things all the time? And I don't just mean your parents. But really, or your teachers. But do you just wonder why? You seem incredibly inquisitive. Like, you just wonder all the time, why is, whatever happening in our world happening? And that is a good characteristic to have, just to wonder and to be, because like I said, I don't know. Those three very important words to have. We don't have all the answers, but we go to seek them. And so curiosity is one, and to be a good listener. A lot of people think you have to be a good talker. You have to be a good communicator. Well, there are different ways to communicate in journalism. It's not all just the speaking, it's the writing. There are many different ways, through the computer, different ways to communicate. With a camera, you can communicate. You can be a really good journalist, a photojournalist. You don't have to talk. You don't have to write. You tell everything through the lens.
That's me.
Those are some of the best journalists I've ever known have been photojournalists. So, but what all of them have in common is they were curious, but they were also listening to the world around them, that they knew what might make really good video, because they were able to listen in on a conversation somebody was having, listening to nature. Like, I just knew something was, like, I knew there was a car crash. I knew that this would make really good video because I heard the birds all coming together in one spot in the tree. You're a good listener. During an interview, because this person you're interviewing is going down a track that you had no idea they would go down when you started the interview, but you're an active listener, and so I know, so I can start asking the follow-up questions, because this is where the story has turned. So those are the two things.
How do you deal with, like, so say, I know this has happened before, like say you're going and writing a story about an ice fair or something, you know, they're carving ice sculptures,
Yeah.
trying to get the largest one,
Mhm.
and you accidentally knock something over.
Ah!
I've seen that happen
I've
before. on
done
YouTube.
that.
And how do
It
you,
was
and
terrible.
the person's mad at you, how do you know, treat that on air? Because I've seen it happen before.
Three more important words, not just I don't know, I am sorry. Those are personal words that when you end up being married, you realize you have to say.
Yeah.
No, you just apologize. You're a human being. It happens. Accidents happen, and it's just very important to say I'm sorry. I had a very serious situation when I was my first year of reporting that I had to say I was sorry about. I was sent to investigate a murder, and nobody wants to do that, but I had to go, and so I went into a neighborhood. And what had happened is the woman had drowned in her hot tub, and we thought, the speculation was that it was a suspicious death, that it wasn't just an accident. And so I went into this neighborhood and started knocking on doors, trying to learn, because I didn't know who this woman was or what happened, trying to gather information. Well, I knocked on one door and I said, "Do you know so-and-so?" And the guy looked at me and said, "Yes, that was my sister, and if you don't get off my property in 10 seconds, I'm gonna kill you." And what are the 3 words that I said?
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
And then I ran.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I gotta go.
So one of the things that now journalism is a good learning experience. You learn something new every day. One of the things I learned from that is it might not always be the best practice to go blind knocking on people's doors.
Yeah.
So,
That's probably a good
especially a
idea.
very sensitive story. So the way journalism has changed is they have this thing called Google Maps, and you can look up people's addresses in a reverse way. When I was a young journalist, there was no way to do that. If I knew somebody's name, I could look up their address in the phone book, but you couldn't do it the reverse way, look up somebody's address and find out their name. Well, you can now.
Yeah.
And so there are different ways to go about that, but that was very scary. I will tell you, I don't know how much more time we have. We're pretty much done.
Yeah, maybe.
One quick story, one more
Yes,
quick story.
yes.
This is my favorite story.
Yes.
This is my favorite story.
Favorite story, all
And
right.
this is probably what I'm most proud of. And it's not necessarily a story that you think I'm going to go, because most of the time people ask, well, what was the favorite story you did? It had to have been like you interviewed a celebrity or the President of the United States. You know, those are all great, and you get to go different places as a journalist, and every 2 days, no 2 days are alike. But the story that I got to do that was my favorite was when a 6-year-old boy with autism disappeared. He disappeared, wandered away from his house. He lived in a very rural area, and it was the middle of the summer, 98 degrees, and his house was surrounded by nothing but forests, and the mosquitoes were very thick. And this was a small town, very few people knew this family. We went on the air that night and said this boy is missing, and within an hour, thousands of people showed up in this community to search for this little boy. They had no idea who he was, but they all showed up, and they searched into the night. 24 hours later, the boy was found by a complete stranger with a dog that was sniffing and had found his scent. Found the boy, covered with mosquito bites, but was okay. And I'm getting chills thinking about it right now. There was no prouder moment than I had, because I'm a father, going on the air that night and saying this boy was found safe. It was an awesome moment, because a lot of times those situations, those stories don't end very well, do they? And a lot of times what we talk about on the news isn't very encouraging, or you don't feel that great about stuff. But that was one of those moments because of the way the community responded, and the fact that this boy had the strength and the courage to survive that night alone in the woods, getting eaten alive by mosquitoes, and it had a very good ending, made me know that, okay, we helped in a small way. As a journalist, we might have helped save that little boy, because had we not communicated that information, people probably wouldn't have turned out. And at the end of the day, why I'm a journalist is I'm a public servant. I'm here to make the community a better place in which to live. And that was, by and large, my favorite story.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Mr. Gallagher.